we have a lot to discuss. So we'll be diving today into some profound themes of growth and transformation. And the first segment will be on personal growth. So tell me, Andy, what do you think really drives the essence of personal growth?
That's a very, very good question. I think the growth cannot happen without the willingness or curiosity and open-mindedness. But then you probably also need to have purpose and goals, because you cannot just keep studying around. Because then in that case, our memory is finite, right? You cannot just keep reading books on different topics. Yes, you probably would be able to strike very good conversations on literature, but probably unless you are going to become a writer or a literature professor, probably just reading things around only without purpose, or even learning many different things, probably is not the best way to go.
That's a good point.
Yes, I think you need to have purpose in life.
May I just stop you there for a moment and ask, is there a specific way to think about this in terms of the human life? Do you think there's a certain point in a human's life where they need to go through this phase of going outside of protocol based methods into more of a, what you're saying is personal growth focused phase?
You mean whether people should just follow sort of a blueprint of sort of success, versus whether people should just maybe follow blueprint to a certain degree, but also be willing to risk and do stuff that are not exactly plain safe.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. So there are people who succeeded in life, who grew in life in many ways, and who contributed to society a lot just by following footprint. And you could also see this in certain professions. Certain professors, especially technical people, including those who receive Nobel Prize, maybe not exactly the most risk-taking type, right? They were really interested about a certain issue,
right?
Very organized, and then they kept working hard. It doesn't mean that they did not experience adversity. They did absolutely experience adversity, right? And the world of academia is actually also, at least in normal institutions, is based on adversity. But you would not say that those guys necessarily did very risky things, right?
Right.
But then you have entrepreneurs who build very successful entrepreneurships just by the fact that they were able to take risks. They were broke sometimes. They lost. But then eventually, just by keep trying, they were able to make a difference. And we have also not just entrepreneurs in business, but we have people who in politics as well, right? So people, revolutionaries, right, who were very close to being killed or imprisoned, and some of them have even been imprisoned, but they somehow embraced it, and they persevered. But it doesn't mean that all of them persevered, though.
Right.
When you take risk, you have to understand that it may end pretty bad. I mean, you also understand what are the impacts and what are the chances that impact to happen. But for example, Alexei Navalny in Russia was probably one of the most brave politicians of our time. He actually, after being poisoned by Novichok, he went back to Russia. He was imprisoned and eventually he died in a prison somewhere near Arctic Circle.
Mm-hmm.
He was a very brave politician, and he probably risked more than pretty much many other politicians did who actually succeeded. But then, sadly, despite his strength of his character, despite his motivation to serve, despite his bravery, he just died. And yeah, I mean, these things happen. So there's probably so there's probably no right way to go about it.
Right.
It depends on what kind of person you are.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a personal thing, right? Yeah, that's true. It's
Yeah, I
something to think about. Like, how did you make the decision? What do you think makes your what helps you make a decision about this? For me, I'm super confused. Like,
well, first of all, like sometimes life makes decisions for you.
right,
This is what I mean. Like, if you are somebody phenomenally smart in physics or mathematics or music or whatever, it's very likely that you are just gonna, double down. You're gonna capitalize on that skill, right? On sort of this God given or nature given talent, and then so you're gonna capitalize on that, and just by that sheer talent and hard work, right? You are going to achieve a lot, and for that you probably are not risking that much, right? But then let's say you are just a very ordinary human being like me. I don't have any particular talent in anything. And then probably it's also fair to say that, well, maybe like you should just, also live an ordinary life.
right,
You also learn a lot by living ordinary life, having family, having kids, right? That's also not an easy thing to do. But then, what if you are somebody who is passionate, somebody who wants to sort of do stuff that is not out of ordinary, not because he wants to be special, but because he's passionate about certain issues in life, it could be policy issues or business related or whatever. So then the only way you can do that is by super hard work and by also willingness to rest, because
yeah.
there is no other way.
So there is that aspect of it where you have to go. It's like playing a game like chess, for example, where you could get lost in all the different possibilities and strategies given in all these books and everything, where you could never, like actually play the game, but keep learning about it. Or you could play and then slowly, like, sort of explore, but at the same time, build your own strategies and go for certain ways of going about it. It's a very intricate, difficult balance to strike. And maybe those people like us who are in the MIT Harvard system, we are maybe like quite used to following the rule books and ways and trends that will make us successful, so-called successful. But I don't know.
Well, the game of chess is, I would say, a predictable game, right? It's game of chess is pretty calculatable, if you will. Like if you are a supercomputer, you can pretty much calculate all the moves.
Right.
Life is not a game of chess. So chess, I would say, a complex game. And what I mean by complex is that, like, for example, building a car is a complex issue, right? But then if you can build one car, you can build the same way 10 other cars, and you can take out different bits and pieces of that car and then put them together in the same way, right? So it's hard to do it. I'm not saying it's not hard, but there is a way to do it, right? But then the life is more of a complicated manner where there's no one size fits all. There's no exact recipe, right? Most of the games we play in life have so many variables that it's just really not easy. And well, I mean, yeah, I mean, if you are in some kind of a career scheme, yes, but like if you are sort of playing not so safe, you are consistently coming out of your comfort zone, going into different things and taking on different challenges, there you probably have a lot of asymmetry in your information. There are so many unknowns that you don't know. And then you end up, and then as a result, you risk more. Of course, like maybe risks are different for somebody. If you now go to war, your risks in the war are much higher than, I mean, probably risks are the same, but your coping mechanisms are not as good as somebody who has been in a war for 2 years now, right? Because they know they have better coping mechanisms. They have better way to calculate what moves to do. They have better sense of things, better sense of battlefield. But you maybe don't have it. And then there's a very famous book by Herodotus. That's a Greek sort of historian who, and then in one of these books, so it's basically book is divided into several books, if you will. He describes the invasion of Greece by Persians, and the Persian king Xerxes is having a conversation with his advisor called Artabanus, and essentially what Artabanus is saying is that, well, he's worried that while he will march his great army and navy in Greece, while Xerxes will march his great army and navy in Greece, it just that he's anticipating certain dangers, and one of the two dangers he sees is that there is no sort of a port or harbor large enough to receive these huge vessels. So in case of storm or some other dangers, so that they are safely parked. So that's one problem he outlines for Xerxes. And the second problem, he says, is that basically, even if nobody resists the advance of the Persian army, the mere distance becoming bigger from Persia to Greece will make the supply lines really hard to logistically to administer, and that may produce a famine. Then, so hearing this stuff, Xerxes kind of disagrees with Artabanus and dismisses even. And then he says this: for if in each matter that comes before us, you will look to all possible chances, never will you achieve anything. Far better is it to have a stout heart always and suffer one's share of evils than to be ever fearing what may happen and never incur a mischance. Success for the most part attends those who act boldly, not those who weigh everything and are slack to venture. So, and then he continues saying that you see how great a height of the power Persia has now reached. Never would it have grown to this point if they who sat upon the throne before me had been like-minded with you, or even though not like-minded, had listened to counselors of such a spirit. And then he goes to Greece, and of course he has a huge army. He crushes Spartan soldiers defending the passage, but then eventually he gets defeated. And then his campaign is over. So I mean, so it's really hard to say. Like, yes, I do agree that if you think about every possibility, you will probably never act, because there's basically endless amount of things that can happen to you 10 years from now. But then what is the sort of best way to like take calculated risk? What is the sort of a balance, right? That's kind of there's no sort of a golden rule there in most of the things. Maybe in finance there is, maybe in some other fields there is, but in life in general probably is not.
Yeah, that's the thing about life. Yeah, on that note, do you think like there is a there is a certain level of, I don't know what to say. There is a certain level of ignorance you need to develop, or like sort of being content with limited understanding of things that are going on to be successful. Like, do you think people who overanalyze, over predict, model, try to figure out everything, end up like in the deeper depths of like failure?
Yeah, I mean that's sort of exactly the argument that Artabanus and Xerxes are having, right? So Artabanus is sort of trying to more overanalyze things, and then the Xerxes is more like, okay, let's just go and then see what happens, because if you consider every possibility, then you probably will be too slow to act or even never act. But then, I mean, so I guess it depends on the impact, right? So risk is one thing, and then second is what are you losing and what are your opportunity cost. And it also depends on ethicality, right? So let's say, I don't know, George Bush made a risk when he took American army to Iraq to invade Iraq, and so yeah, he made a risk, and for maybe very good intentions as well. But then it did not end up to be a successful thing, right? It caused a lot of pain, destruction, and suffering on both sides, on the side of Iraqis as well as on the side of Americans. And it did not really achieve the goal to democratize and liberalize Iraq at the end, because after Americans left, the ISIS started to sort of become stronger. I mean, created and then become stronger. And then, so if you are just risking only for yourself, then it probably could be more adventurous there. And if the downside is not gonna kill you, but then if the downside is too bad, then you probably should do slightly more calculation and maybe a bit of hedging as well, right? So the risk in itself can be managed, right? So if you know how to hedge it, or how to create certain buffers to absorb the impact. But then it also depends on the problem of agency, right? That, like, if you are then now in charge to risk for other people as well, then you definitely have more ethical obligation of, and maybe obligation of duty of care, to really make all the necessary steps to make sure that the worst doesn't happen to your own people.
Right.
If that's possible. If that's not possible, then it's hard to say. But then for yourself, if you are a young person, want to try certain things, I think the best way is to just try them. I mean, but then it doesn't mean to try things that are useless. Like, you definitely should not try cocaine and all that kind of stuff, because it probably doesn't give you much, right? And there's a huge risk that you develop dependency. So those things you probably shouldn't try. I mean, trying out cigarettes, yeah, maybe it will not kill you that fast, but probably payoff also not that big, right?
Right.
But then try your entrepreneurship or try to do certain project or apply here or there. Those things I think you should try.
That's fair. That's a great point. Do you think the I don't know. I always have thought of this whole question of where do I lose, like where do I let go of the controls? Where do I not let go of the controls a lot? Like um, yeah, it's intricate, like you're saying. It's a very delicate balance, and uh, you at some point it boils down to what sort of philosophical models are you developing for yourself. And do you think, like in these regards, like there is really anything that is right or wrong? Like you come from a law background, and I don't think there is anything right or wrong. It's really like you do something and you face the consequences. And these consequences are also sometimes in your favor, depending on the timing, other factors. It's very random sometimes. Yeah, so I mean, it's it's hard, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean I do agree with you, like in a sense that um, yeah, every action has a consequence of some form, and sometimes that's internalized, meaning that that consequence is to you only, and sometimes that's sort of an you create an externality with that consequence. That means other people or society pays the price, or whoever or whatever else, right? So I think for me, there are certain things that how I live my life, and doesn't mean that everybody should live it that way.
Mm,
But for me, it's essential that I'm being just and fair.
I see.
Um, so as long as I believe that I am being just and I'm being fair, and I'm coming out of not out of my ego, but out of the desire to serve, to make a difference, then I just go for it. Um,
Right.
yeah, and and sometimes good things happen, and sometimes I'm not so successful, and actually even worse, sometimes I completely screw up myself and or my career, and I've done that already a few times. Also in the name of justice. So whether, but then I've been reflecting on that, whether was there my ego involved, and that's what actually made me to do stupid, maybe miscalculated decision, um, and taking on that adversity that was probably not necessarily useful to take, including for the cause that I was fighting for. And yeah, I mean sometimes there have been mistakes when I probably did not control my ego that well. And in the name of justice, it was actually my anger that pushed me to do certain thing, or my whatever sense of my identity that which also essentially could be ego driven, right?
Right.
That sort of made me to act in a certain way. Um, but I think that if you really are somebody who wants to do good in
Yeah.
life and doesn't get tricked by his own ego, I think most of the time consequences may not be good, but will not be regrettable.
Hmm.
The time that I regret certain things is because when I screwed up,
Hmm.
um, when I become arrogant, when I fall to my hubris, um, and yeah, or when I was not diligent enough, when I should have been, right? But then there were situations sometimes that it's a judgment call, and then you made the call, and still you actually lost. But that you don't have to regret.
Yeah.
That was a judgment call, and yeah, and then you did what you had to do. Or there was like you've done some best effort, you have not done anything wrong. There were circumstances happened that, well, you did not win, but that's also okay.
Yeah.
As long as, I guess, you are true to yourself, you
Right.
feel when you are really honest to yourself, and then
Yeah.
you feel that, well, I mean, based on my values, uh, based on common sense, uh, well, I've done the best I could, then it's fine. But then if you feel that there was the elements of anger or pride or um, some other things that are not good things in life that brought you to do certain act in a certain way, and that was the consequence of why you lost, maybe you need to sort of elaborate a little bit more and think about what you need to do so that you learn
Right.
in your next life.
Yeah.
I mean, next decision, not your next life.
So the bottom line maybe is that you should probably be honest to yourself, follow what seems the best to you, but not at the same time get too caught up in the internal microscopic details of things. Maybe somewhere along those lines is where we are converging.
Can you say it again?
Yeah, it's like don't get too caught up in the details, but then do things at a level where you can take the risk, but then uh, if there can be some risk and don't be completely risk free because then you will not take those little bumps in life that will make you explore around and check it out, check new things out. I mean, and then at the same time, you should do it in a way that you're honest with yourself, like you are doing it in a way that you don't leave any scope for regrets, for example. Maybe is probably along those lines. And eventually, your own personality will grow, and that is what we can call growth in some sense. Because growth is a kind of change that is positive, but whether it is positive or not, that is something that really depends on the perspective. And if it is positive to you, that's the most important thing, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point of what you're saying. I think that when it comes to details, there are essential details
Right,
and
right,
there are details that are not essential.
right.
Essential details are important to pay full attention to because that will make or break uh, what you need to achieve, right? But then there are so many other details that are not that essential, and maybe you don't have to be like, at least from the start, be fully aware about everything, right? Because some of the things will sort of emerge, but you do need to have some sort of a model of how thing is going to work, and if you have a possibility to sort of try out that model somehow, somewhere, then it's good. But then there's this thing that basically there's the Prussian military thinker. His name is Karl von Clausewitz. And then Clausewitz basically says that the plans don't last after the first counter with the enemy.
Mm.
But planning is useful. And when you are planning, you have to have that in mind, how the battlefield may evolve and sort of what could your potential moves be if the battlefield evolves in this way or the other way.
Mhm.
But then he still believes that the planning is useful, and that's also true, right? So we need to sort of be able to think broadly, um, and think through these scenarios
Mm.
and probabilities, and do our risk management and decision planning that way. But I do agree with you that you can't be obsessed with every detail, and then you have to understand that if you fail, you at least learn, right? And that's also an outcome. So as long as you are still alive, then you keep growing. But then there could be also things that you are willing to die for. Right? Somebody asked, what is the life worth living for? And then the answer was, the life is worth living for the things that you are ready to die for. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess, yeah, try out, know that you may lose, and be open to lose and learn. And while you do that, as long as you do not harm other people, that's okay. But then, I mean, other people who do not deserve to be harmed. Like if somebody is going into war with you or wants to kill you and you harm them, that's, I would say, within the legal boundary of self-defense. But then if you, instead of harming them, you harm some innocent person, that's a collateral damage. There I do have a problem about it.
Right. Yeah, then I think that's where we sort of converge and realize that it's a hard topic, and maybe it's very, very dependent on how you want to define what growth is for you. So all the people who are asking and talking about growth on other channels, other discussion forums and all that, they think of growth in their own way. Everyone thinks of growth in their own way. And it's a really subjective matter that cannot be really defined, but only we can feel it, maybe feel it through the stories of, like you're talking about Circe's, talking about the Prussian, what is the name again?
Clausewitz, Karl von Clausewitz.
Clausewitz, for example, that, once you have formed an opinion, once you have formed like some objectives you want to achieve, and then you go through those and you have learned something in the process. So that change that happened was a change you wanted. And if that is a change you wanted, well, that is growth to you. And I think that is all there is to it, maybe. Maybe you could close this with that thought in mind. It is,
I absolutely agree with you.
It is probably that way. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, let's say fuck you to everyone who just thinks about growth as something, because everyone has a different notion of what growth is, and there is no such thing as, all those self-help, self-growth driven and all those things. They're good. They give you various options, but then in the end, it is your job to define what growth is to you. And maybe that's what our viewers should sit down today and think about. Sit down and think about, what this panda and dog are talking about, like in terms of growth. Because to me, growth is something, to you, growth is something else. What is growth to you? That is the question to our users at the end of this podcast today. And I really thank you for joining. And I think this was a fantastic discussion that will definitely be carried forward down the line.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thanks a lot.
Great.